You already know you're in a season. You can feel it, even if you haven't said it out loud. Something has been stirring. It might not be dramatic, just barely enough to notice. Your life is humming along. It's full of the things that you believe are important. And because nothing's on fire, it's easy to keep going without asking what the season might be asking of you. For many of us, that's where the tension lives, whether or not we feel it as tension. Not tension about making changes, but around acknowledgement. Because the moment that you admit that this is a season, and seasons are always moving, you can't unsee it. You either engage what's forming and deal with what that entails, or you ignore it, postpone it, or let it keep working in the background. Either way, the season doesn't stop. It keeps working on you, drawing on your energy, testing your alignment, pulling at your sense of purpose. There's a lot we can learn about how to approach seasons like this from the way distillers approach the barrels they age. Because in whiskey making, time always matters, but attention matters even more. This is about recognizing when you're in an important season, one that's shaping you, and learning how to stay attentive so you don't age past the moment you were meant to move forward. If you've ever wondered whether you're in a season, or whether the season you're in is asking something of you, you're not alone. Most people don't struggle to recognize seasons in hindsight. The harder part is knowing how to hold a season when you're still inside it, especially when nothing feels broken, especially when things are still working. Once someone senses that they're in a season, it becomes less about whether something is happening and more about how they respond to it. Not everyone responds the same way, and none of these responses are wrong. They're human, understandable, and they're often shaped by the seasons that we've already been through. Here are a few of the common ways people tend to hold a season once they know it's speaking to them. Some people ignore it. They notice the prompts, the restlessness, the recurring questions, the pull towards something undefined. But they keep moving forward as if nothing is being asked. They're busy. Work is demanding. People depend on them. So instead of engaging the season, they push through it. Over time, this can cost energy. Focus becomes harder to sustain. Joy feels thinner. They're still showing up every day, but not fully formed by what the season is trying to say to them. Others postpone engagement. They don't deny they're in a season. They just tell themselves they'll come back to it later, when they're less tired, when there's more margin, when life settles down. They acknowledge they're in a season, but they keep it at arm's length. This often looks like being responsible on the outside, but internally something stays unresolved. Rest doesn't restore the way it used to. Time off doesn't quite refill the tank. Because the season keeps asking its questions, and postponing attentiveness doesn't silence them. Some sit with it carefully. They resist the urge to rush. They don't fight the past or force the future. They listen. They notice patterns. They allow discernment to do its work. This posture often feels reflective. There aren't clear answers yet and no obvious next step, but there is honesty. They aren't pretending the season isn't there, and they're not trying to outpace it either. And for others, they endure the season out of uncertainty. They stay because the next season hasn't introduced itself fully yet. The current season may no longer fit, but it's familiar. and familiarity can feel safer than uncertainty, even when it no longer serves who they're becoming. This posture often carries a quiet grief because something more aligned hasn't appeared yet. Different postures, different reasons, same reality. The season itself doesn't change based on how we hold it. It continues its work, shaping us, whether we engage with it with attentiveness or simply remain inside it. Seasons come whether we actively step into them or passively experience them. Some arrive through change, some through growth, some through loss, and some simply through time. In whiskey making, seasons are essential. A barrel of whiskey doesn't age without them. Heat causes the wood of the barrel to expand, and cold causes it to contract. Humidity, pressure, and time pull the spirit in and out of the barrel, season after season. This is how whiskey gains character, depth, and structure. Without seasons, whiskey never becomes what it was meant to be. But here's the distinction that matters. The barrel doesn't decide how long the whiskey stays, and the whiskey doesn't decide either. That responsibility belongs to the distiller. And that's where the lesson is for us. We're not just the barrel passively absorbing whatever the season brings without reflection or response. And we're not just the whiskey being shaped entirely without awareness. We do absorb what seasons bring: heartache, disappointment, success, pressure, growth. And at times we are shaped without awareness. That's exactly why attentiveness matters. The question isn't whether we're being formed, it's whether we're willing to notice how we're being formed and what that formation is preparing us for. We are more like the distiller. Our role isn't to rush the process, and it isn't to force outcomes. Our role is to pay attention, to recognize what the season has already done, to notice how we've been shaped by time that we've spent in the season, and to discern whether this season is still refining us or whether staying longer is beginning to shape us in ways that no longer align with what we're built for. Distillers understand this. They don't rely on calendars, and they don't decide based on how long a barrel should age. They engage the whiskey. Periodically, they'll walk through the rickhouse with a simple tool called a whiskey thief. A whiskey thief is a long, narrow tube used to draw a small sample from inside the barrel. They taste, they listen, they pay attention. They ask questions like, is the whiskey still developing? Is the balance holding? Is the barrel still serving the spirit or starting to overshadow it? This is where seasons stop being about time and start being about formation. A season can be long or short, depending on what it's shaping and what the whiskey is being prepared for next. A single barrel, a blend, a secondary cask, a bottle. Movement is always tied to purpose. And in the same way, our responsibility isn't just to endure seasons, but to engage them, to stay in conversation with what's forming inside of us. To ask, not how long have I been here, but who am I becoming here? And what am I being prepared for? That's the work of attentiveness. And it's a critical part of the distillation process, moving us from success towards significance. What a season shapes in us isn't determined only by the season itself. It's shaped by how we hold it. Two people can be in a similar season with similar responsibilities, similar constraints, and similar fatigue, and come out formed very differently. When a season is ignored or postponed for too long, it doesn't usually result in something dramatic. There's no sudden collapse, no obvious failure. What happens instead is quieter. We begin to live just short of who we're becoming. We spend our energy trying to hold on to the season that we're in instead of preparing for what the next season is shaping us toward. We rely more on what's familiar than what's aligned. And over time, the impact we're capable of gets delayed. Not denied, just deferred. Formation without attentiveness tends to default towards comfort instead of calling. But attentiveness changes that. When someone stays present to a season, even without knowing what's next, the season begins to clarify its purpose. And this is where discernment shows up. Engaging honestly with what the season has already formed and what it still may be forming. This posture won't eliminate uncertainty, and it won't magically create energy, but it preserves alignment. It allows the season to do its work without reshaping us into something smaller than what we were created for. The difference isn't movement yet, it's awareness. And awareness is what makes forward movement possible when that time comes. There's another reality distillers talk about, and one that fits this conversation almost perfectly. A whiskey can stay in a barrel too long, even when everything in the process was done right. At a certain point, the oak stops adding structure and starts to overpower the spirit. They call this over-oaking. And what makes this important is how subtle it is. There's no single moment when the whiskey suddenly turns bad. No obvious signal that something is wrong. In fact, the whiskey will still taste good. But when a distiller carefully tastes, they notice something has shifted. The barrel, which once shaped the whiskey, has started to overshadow it. The very thing that helped form its character now begins to mute what made it distinctive. The whiskey didn't fail its mission. It just stayed longer than the moment required. And this is where attentiveness matters. Because without tasting, without listening, without noticing what the season has already formed, the whiskey keeps aging and becomes something slightly different than what it was intended to be. So this is our invitation, not a moment to decide anything. This is not a call to make a move, to change jobs or disrupt your life. It's just an invitation to be attentive to the season that you are already in. To do what distillers do, to pause, to taste, to listen. So here are a few questions worth sitting with, not to answer all at once and not to solve, just to notice what surfaces. First, what signs tell you that this season is still shaping you in life-giving ways? And what signs suggest it may be starting to overshadow what you were created to bring forward? Where does energy feel generated, and where does it feel drained? Second, which posture best describes how you're holding this season right now? Ignoring it? Postponing engagement? Sitting with it carefully? Or enduring it out of uncertainty? This isn't for judgment, just an honest naming. What has that posture been protecting you from? And what might it be costing you? Third, if you continue in this season without deeper attentiveness, what is likely to be shaped in you? In the same way a whiskey can stay in the barrel for too long, not ruined, still good, but over-oaked, shaped into something different than it was meant to be. what might begin to change in you? What parts of your character, creativity, or calling might start to be overshadowed, not because the season failed, but because it stayed longer than the moment required? These aren't questions to rush. They're questions to return to help bring attentiveness to your season. If you've ever gone to a whiskey tasting, you take notes on what stood out and what you want to remember. Here are my tasting notes from today. Yours might be different. What stood out to me is that seasons don't rush us. We rush ourselves. Seasons have their own pace. What makes a difference is whether we stay present to what's being formed instead of simply staying where we are because it feels familiar or safe. Nothing has to be decided right now. You don't have to name everything. You don't have to resolve the tension. You don't have to know what's next. This season may still be shaping you, or it may be asking you to notice something that is ready to move forward. Either way, attentiveness matters. So if something stirred in you today, don't rush past it. Let the question linger. Let attentiveness do its work. And remember, clarity isn't found. It's crafted. Thanks for listening to Crafted Clarity. If you're a leader wrestling with the tension between success and significance, or you're trying to align your work with a deeper calling, I'd love to connect with you. If your organization is facing questions about strategy, whether it's alignment, ROI, or building confidence in your team, this is the work we do every day at iBrand. And if you walk this journey yourself, or maybe you're right in the middle of it, I'd love to hear your story and maybe even share it here on the podcast. You can find me at craftedclarity.net.